They say one mistake can ruin a lifetime, but what happens when you make two? I never imagined I'd be standing here, trying to piece together the fragments of a double life I created. It wasn't planned. It wasn't deliberate. But it happened. And it all began the day I realized I wasn't alone in my loneliness. Let me take you back to the beginning. My husband and I had what most would call a perfect marriage, at least from the outside. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. We'd grown distant, our conversations reduced to logistics and polite exchanges. The passion, the connection, the spark, it had all but disappeared. And then, there was Caleb. Caleb worked at the gym I went to 3 times a week. He was everything my husband wasn't: charming, attentive, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. At first, it was innocent. He'd smile when I walked in, ask about my day, offer tips on my workout routine. But somewhere along the way, those smiles lingered a little longer, those questions became a little more personal, and the space between us seemed to shrink. One evening, after an intense workout session, Caleb asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. My instinct screamed no, but my heart, or maybe my ego, said yes. Sitting across from him at that tiny cafe, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He made me laugh, really laugh, in a way that felt foreign and exhilarating. By the time we parted ways, I knew I was in trouble, but I told myself it was harmless, just a coffee, just a friend. Except it wasn't. The texts started the next day. Casual at first, a meme, a joke, a comment about the gym. But soon, they became more frequent, more intimate. He'd tell me how beautiful I looked, how much he looked forward to seeing me. And I, despite knowing better, basked in the attention. It wasn't long before we crossed the line. One night, after a particularly heated exchange of texts, he asked me to meet him. My hands trembled as I typed, "Okay." We met at his apartment, and the moment he opened the door, the air between us ignited. I'd love to tell you I felt guilty, that I hesitated, but I didn't. In that moment, all I felt was wanted, desired, alive. After that night, Caleb and I fell into a routine of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. He was my escape, my sanctuary. And then there was Liam. Liam was an old college friend who had recently moved back to town. We reconnected at a mutual friend's party, and it was as if no time had passed. He was charming, funny, and, most importantly, safe. Or so I thought. We started meeting for lunches, catching up on lost time. He'd always been a flirt, but I brushed it off as harmless banter. Until one afternoon, when he leaned across the table and said, "You know, I always regretted not asking you out back in college." My heart skipped a beat. "Liam, you're ridiculous," I said, laughing nervously. "I mean it," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine. "If things were different, if you weren't married..." I should have shut it down. I should have walked away. But instead, I let his words linger, let the idea take root. And before I knew it, I was meeting him too. It was like living in 2 parallel worlds, each one feeding a part of me that had been starving for years. With Caleb, it was raw and passionate, a whirlwind of physical attraction that consumed us both. With Liam, it was emotional and intimate, a connection that made me feel understood and valued. They filled the gaps my marriage couldn't, and for a while I convinced myself I could keep it all separate. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and mine were no exception. One night, as I lay in bed next to my husband, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Caleb. "Can't stop thinking about you." I quickly locked the screen, but not before my husband noticed. "Who was that?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Just a friend," I replied, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. He didn't push, but I could feel his suspicion growing. And then there was Liam. He'd started dropping hints about wanting more, about not wanting to share me. The walls of my carefully constructed double life were closing in. The breaking point came one fateful evening when Caleb and Liam, unbeknownst to each other, showed up at the same event. I'd been invited by a mutual friend, and foolishly, thought I could manage the situation. But the moment their eyes met, I knew I was done for. "Who's he?" Caleb asked, his voice low and tense. "A friend," I stammered, but the look on Liam's face told me he wasn't buying it. "A friend?" Liam repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Funny, because that's not what you said last night." The room spun as their accusations flew, each one cutting deeper than the last. My husband, who had been standing off to the side, finally stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. "What's going on here?" And just like that, my double life came crashing down. The truth spilled out, raw and ugly, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. Caleb stormed out, Liam followed, and my husband, he just stood there, staring at me like he didn't even know who I was anymore. In the days that followed, I was forced to confront the wreckage I'd created. My husband filed for divorce, Caleb cut all ties, and Liam, well, he'd moved on to someone less complicated. I was left with nothing but the echo of my choices and the pain I'd caused. They say one mistake can ruin a lifetime, but I made two. And the cost? Everything. I wasn't alone in my loneliness, but now, I'm alone in my regret.